everyone for coming this evening to the Zeitgeist panel discussion and music event. It's quite humbling, firstly, to be able to organise and curate this program with such a great group of artists and DJs, and also, secondly, to have such great support from family, friends, colleagues, peers, contemporaries, a lot of people that I can see in this room. It's an honour to work with you all. It has been for the last couple of decades, I think, with some of us. So, welcome to the Zeitgeist, which is part of the Australia Now 2017 program. Australia Now is a year-long program to showcase Australian culture in Germany, highlight new collaborations and deepen networks across a variety of fields through music, circus, visual arts, dance, theatre, cinema, photography, sport, science and technology. I mean, that covers a whole range of stuff. But honestly, with electronic music, there's many things that we have to do on a daily basis in our careers and our jobs and our lives that are not just music. They're these other disciplines and fields as well. It's an invitation to experience the vitality and diversity of Australian culture, the Australia Now program. I could not think of a better representation of Australia Now here in Berlin than the connections we actually have in the field of electronic music and its culture, very now, as they say. I would like to invite Marguerite Levin from our embassy here in Berlin to say a few short words to officially open proceedings.
Thank you. To be honest, I think that Christian really just did my job for me. So, hi, good evening. My name's Margalit. I work at the Australian Embassy, which Christian didn't realise today when he saw me for the first time in casual clothing, this is how I normally look when I'm not in the office. But I guess tonight's really not about us, it's really about you. All we can say is that we have, through this cultural year that we have this year that is about all the things that Christian told you about, we have the opportunity to work with you. And for us, you know, you think that you get a benefit from us, but really we get a benefit from you. Australian culture is not just about kangaroos and beaches and all these things that people love to talk about. It's about the immense creativity and innovation that's going on at home, and it actually makes me so proud to know, for example, that there's probably an Australian artist playing in a club here in Berlin every week. Like, that's a phenomenal thing and people should know about it. And for me, this is a huge part of Australian culture, and I have a great job where I get to walk around and say, this is what I promote. So thank you. We benefit from this. We're so proud to support this program. I'll be there on Sunday in a different version of the same outfit.
Hey, can you wear a little bit like black like us, you know, the real cool Berlin, like, you know?
I'll put on my Berlin outfit and I'll come. But thank you so much. It's exciting for us to be able to include electronic music, and also for me personally, this is also, I mean, I am a big fan of electronic music. I love many types of music, but this is something that I love personally, and it's been awesome to work with you, and I can't wait to see what you guys are going to do on Sunday.
Thank you very much. The Zeitgeist, obviously it's a German word. And it's a very special German word that is described in English as the defining spirit or mood of a particular period of history as shown by the ideas and beliefs of the time. And when I chose the name, well, I didn't really, even before I knew of Australia Now and the possibilities with a program like this, I always envisioned that there could be a deeper, greater official connection in terms of arts and culture with electronic music and Berlin. Using the bond that we have as Australians with Berlin, I can see people here that live here, that have performed here many times. You know, where are we at now? That's the biggest question that I want to ask. Like, where are we at now? 10 years ago, Mike was playing at Watergate. Almost 20 years ago, Simon here was playing at the original Tresor. We have a bond, we have a connection, we have friends, we have colleagues in Germany from all over the world, and it's never been put on official record that we have that, so I just feel that we should all do this evening. Most of us would agree that Berlin is unique. Many Germans would agree that Berlin is unique in terms of arts and culture and its nightlife. It's not only home to institutions like Tresor and Berghain and record stores like Hardwax, but to artists and industry professionals from all over the world. I would like to quickly explain the motivation as well behind creating this project. It's to have that official forum to explore and talk about the relationship of electronic music between Australia and Berlin, to be able to look through the lens of Berlin and discuss some relevant issues in our industry. I'd like to start the panel discussion and introduce our first couple of guests here on my right. We have Simon Caldwell from Sydney. He's a veteran, a legend. Everyone's going to get red-faced up here. He's been running a party in Sydney called Mad Racket, which many of us know. It's been running 19 years, I think, almost, yeah. That's a feat in itself. I don't know many people that run a club night or an event or a party. It's moved beyond a club night. It's moved beyond the rave. It's moved into something that is cultural. It's embedded. It has inspired people. People play there. People from Germany have toured Australia and played at this party. We have Mike from Melbourne, Mike Callender, who I have run a record label with. We've had parties together. We've played many events together. You also were the first person in Australia, I think, to tour people like DJT, Michael Mayer, people from Cologne, people from Berlin that are very, very well-known DJs. They're institutions in themselves. And so we have a connection, you have a connection going back a long time. On my left, we have artist Eloise, also known as Emma Sainsbury, to her family and some of her friends, depending which friends. And she moved here, I think, a similar time to me. Did you, Emma? Over 4 years. Yeah, so very similar. And Emma is originally from Adelaide, I believe, lived in Sydney. You run a label here in Berlin, you DJ in Berlin, you make your own records in Berlin. What else do you do in Berlin? You run nights in Berlin. So the thing that we want to discuss tonight as well is that the people that are part of this program are not just DJs. They're artists, they're business people. They are part of... It's a cultural commodity. And the thing for me tonight that's very important is that maybe sometimes in Australia, people might not agree, it's only seen as an economic commodity, something that gets looked at in a way that's just nightlife, just entertainment, just drinks behind the bar, just laws, regulations, whatever. But here in Berlin, it is respected as an art form, and everything involved in that is respected in an art form too. First topic, I'm going to ask you guys now. There's a book, Geoffrey Blaney's 1966 book, The Tyranny of Distance, How Distance Shaped Australia's History. We're a long way away, 16,000 kilometres to the east coast, it's a long way away. Simon actually responded. I had a series of artists' questions for this weekend, and Simon's was very interesting because in regards to what's happening now, because of the internet and whatever, Simon said that the tyranny of distance is really not as relevant as it used to be. Am I correct? Yes. So I'm just going to hand this over quickly to you. I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. How much easier is it in this day and age with the internet for younger people coming into the industry to learn about electronic music, to run parties, to tour someone perhaps from Germany, compared to what you've had to do in the past?
Yeah, I think I did say that it's a lot easier. I think everyone can see that the internet changed basically the whole game for most industries, including ours, you know. We had email in 1998 when I first came to Germany, but, you know, there was no Facebook. So everyone, yeah, and the fact that everyone is much more connected online, you have a much easier possibility to follow artists, to get your own work out into the world on the same kind of platforms that everyone else has. So it's basically kind of brought, I think, everything a lot closer, you know, like if you know what you're trying to do and you know who to connect with around the world, then it's much easier to do so, you know, and you can do the research a lot easier.
That's it. So I would say we have cheaper airfares compared to what it was, let's say, 20 years ago. We have the internet. It's changed everything. Like you say, it's made an even playing field. Do you think that might be one of the reasons behind more Australians performing and living in Berlin? Or two of the reasons, or three of the reasons?
It's definitely a part of it. I mean, Berlin has become a phenomenon, I think, in electronic music in itself. So it becomes like a huge magnet for a lot of people. There's so many people based here, and it's for a good reason. It's not only just because it's in the centre, relatively in the centre of Europe, but it's because it was originally, like in the 90s, a lot of people moved here because it was incredibly cheap to live here. And there was a lot of possibilities to do things cheaply, and it was a much more open kind of place to be than a lot of the places that people came from around the world, from the UK, from the US, from Australia. And obviously now Berlin has become more expensive, but it's also become, because of all those people coming here from the 90s until now, it's become more and more of a hub. And so it's more often than not, you'll find an artist who's from the UK or from the States, and they're now based in, or Australia now, they're now based in Berlin. So it's become this, I think, a real magnet for that, because, but saying that, you can still connect with all of those things while you're in Australia. So you don't have to actually come here all the time, but you can organise to come here,
Yep. I'm going to ask you first, and then I'm going to pass if I could ask you kindly to pass the microphone over to Mike. What have we learned from our relationship as Australians with Berlin from the first time that you came here? What's changed? What's the most important thing in how business is done and how people come here, make records in the summer, and go home? Is it because it's a transient place, even though it's a hub? What have we learned? That it's a place to come to learn, or is it a place to come to give? What's the relationship?
I think people often come to Berlin and kind of fall in love a bit with Berlin and the life here, and the fact that you are able to do a lot of things here that, there's a great freedom in Berlin, especially when you come from a place like Sydney, which, if anyone knows anything about what's happened in Sydney in the last 3 to 4 years, it's been a massive kind of crackdown on venues. And so I think there's that sort of romanticism that people find in Berlin, but also, just also the fact that so people find that they can come here and they feel like a freedom here, I think, which they don't necessarily find at home. Does that answer your question?
I totally agree. I mean, I can see Megan here, who sent me some questions on the weekend, I think it was, and it's the same thing. For me, it was like answering the questions. It's like thinking about the freedom to express, freedom to play music longer, freedom to not be regulated as a creative individual perhaps as much. And then I looked at the history of the electronic music that we all know and play, things like house and techno music. House music was born of a particular freedom or a necessary emancipation from social issues, and perhaps that's part of that allure, part of that romanticism still about Berlin.
I think so, yeah. I mean, visiting here in the 90s and then coming back again, there's still that sort of spirit that people try and retain, that's that kind of open, like free kind of feeling in clubs that I think's quite hard to find in other parts of the world.
That's very true, I think. So, Mike.
Thanks.
Hi, how you doing? I remember you were working at a record distribution company back in Melbourne quite a while ago, more than a decade ago, probably.
2003.
Yep, and that was sort of your sort of semi-inroads into the German scene and industry and understanding how things worked over here. Those ties that you made to Germany back then, how important are they still now from 2003?
They are probably... It's the most important thing driving my music career, I think, is that original connection with... it was actually music from Cologne mostly that was most important to me. But so in 2003 to 2006, we were importing records And for me, yeah, the German records were the most exciting, or the German handled records. They might have been from elsewhere, but they were kind of pushed by a company called Compact. And fast forward 14 years, I think I sent them my first demo probably 11 years ago, and last week we just not signed to the label, but we've signed to start a label that's distributed globally by Compact. So I've been chasing that since 2003. So yeah, it's very important.
That's 14 years of a relationship there, and it's finally reached some kind of. But in the meantime,
and now we're just getting started.
Exactly. But in the meantime, I think you played some great gigs in places like Cologne and whatever over the years.
Yeah, done Watergate a bunch of times here. Some great clubs in Cologne, like old, paper factories and, transformed places. And I think that's a big part of the difference between here and home as well, is this use of a space. There's a space there, there's a resource. At home, you've got to cut through so much crap to make it possible to satisfy, OH&S and public liability and authorities and whatever. Whereas here, it's just a bit more. It's a bit more free. It's a simple thing. Maybe Sydney's experiencing a bit of, on the underground. There's a bit of that kind of bravado that is happening on Melbourne in a small sense, I guess. But this is on such a huge scale.
Yeah. It's interesting talking about freedom to do things. I think if you have a particular freedom to pursue creative things that are also business things, because we've all got to eat, we've all got to pay the rent as artists. The interesting thing, Emma, I'm going to ask you the next question. So on here, is it just being an artist or a DJ to be involved in this industry? Running labels, events, agencies, all those things seem to go hand in hand for many of us. How has your experience been in Berlin so far in doing all of those things? Some kind of Renaissance individual, a polymath, or...
I guess it depends on the person, really. I've always been involved in a lot of different aspects of the industry, even from when I started, because I really like to see where work's going or how it's ending up. So you write some music, but it's nice to see how it's handled at the pressing plant, or it's nice to see how it gets to the final destination.
Actually, before you go on, that's an interesting one. It's like being physically closer to having your record pressed or mastered. Absolutely. Or this kind of stuff.
Absolutely, and you can have coffee with people and get advice on things and really work face-to-face with people. Or I go to my distributor who's in Hamburg, say hi and check out the warehouse, and just really, there's like quality control from beginning to end, and you can really make sure that what you're producing is what you dreamt of. And as an artist, I think that's really, really important.
So while the internet is an important thing and the tyranny of distance is not such a great thing anymore, being physically in a space, having a conversation is still very important, right?
Look, I think it depends on the person. Like, some people are really, really good online and really, really capable and can do amazing things that you couldn't even imagine. But for me personally, like when I meet a person face to face and have a chat with them, it's like the best kind of interaction. And you also, I find, you tend to uncover things maybe you wouldn't have thought to ask if you were doing like a direct interaction on the internet, or if you're in a studio working with somebody, instead of sending a file and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this, and you make your change and send it back. If you're sitting with them, then you've got the ability to manipulate the sound or make changes on the go that I think is a bit more intuitive than online.
Interesting. So the next thing, this is all about an intersection of business and creativity, and most of us as artists or people involved in this stuff, it is all about creativity, but it's also about, I mean, you have to find your way. There's ways to get gigs. I mean, we can't even get into it here. It's really, it's quite a bizarre scene. It's not very regulated in that sense. It's not like you go to this school, you get this degree, you go and meet this person for an interview, you can be on this salary and you go here. Each of us as individuals, we can talk to each other about it, but in every single case, it is so unique how to survive. So over here, I mean, I feel that I learned a lot about our business as an economic thing, as an economic commodity. But the thing that I learned most, or that I feel most over here, is that Germans, and in particular in Berlin, it's a cultural commodity. What we all do as DJs, what we do as a live act, what we do when we produce music, when we create parties with sound systems, and all these crazy things that happen, and people come and enjoy it and have a good time, and it gets covered on things online like Boiler Room, and then you see things on places like Resident Advisor. Someone has a thing in Groove magazine here in Germany. I mean, we don't have the population in Australia, correct? But we do have a big population. Why don't we have some of these things ourselves that are quite big for electronic music? I'm going to go back this way to Simon, and I'm just going to ask you, hang on. Mic number one. It's after reading everyone's answers, every artist's answers in the interview questions, which are too detailed to get into tonight, it seemed to me that people, artists, people involved as professionals in our industry really enjoy and appreciate and respect being valued as something cultural, a cultural commodity, something that doesn't need to have necessarily have a price tag. Yeah, it's great if you put bums on seats in the club and people come and the promoter gets paid and this person gets paid and all the rest of it. But here it is valued as a cultural commodity. I mean, you have places like Tresor that have been running, decades and have a record label. There are places like Berghain that have a collaboration with the Staatsballett, so the state opera here in Berlin. Do you think there is a difference with the Australian mainstream perception compared to perhaps a Berlin mainstream perception of what electronic music and club culture is?
Yeah, I think sort of but I think it's probably hard to completely generalise. I mean, Berlin is probably fairly specific within Germany. I do think that in Germany there is more of an appreciation of electronic music as an art form and as a cultural practice, and in Europe, in other places as well. Like in France, you can be paid electronic musician and an artist, recognised as an artist like any other kind of artist. And yeah, in Australia, I don't think it's unappreciated, but I think it's appreciated by a fairly sort of select group of the population who basically understand what it is about.
How about in the cultural sphere, so in the arts? Here I see a lot of interdisciplinary things like ballet and techno getting together in a place called Berghain, which is world famous. And I mean, in Australia, can you imagine an institution like your party, Mad Racket, doing something with the ballet in a cultural space?
Well, I don't think I'd do anything with the ballet or even with a symphony orchestra, because
that's too Detroit, right?
Yeah, it's a little too Detroit for me, it's true. But saying that, we get regularly booked probably once a year as part of usually the Vivid Festival to play at the Sydney Opera House, which is it's a cultural icon in itself, and that's a recognition in itself. We regularly play at the Sydney Festival, so I think it is recognised, but I think it's put in a basket, and it's hard to convince people that being a DJ is a real job.
Yeah, I mean, we've all had that one.
It's trying to explain to your girlfriend that getting home at 6 a.m. and you look like you're having loads of fun, it's still a job. It can be quite difficult, but it's a job. As well as everything else, it's an actual thing, I think. So I think people have a mental hurdle with that more in Australia.
Yeah. How can we, maybe, I don't know, you or Mike can answer this one, and maybe I pass it over to Emma afterwards. How can we learn from our experiences here? I mean, you've had 19 years of experience coming to Berlin to play. Mike, 10. We've lived here 4 or 5 years, running labels, doing nights. What can we bring to us as Australians and to help put ourselves into that cultural light a little bit more like it is here? Is there something that we can do? Is there a way forward? It's a very hard question to answer in a format like this, but are there possibilities? Are there things that you've seen along the way that could go in that direction?
Just really briefly, yeah, definitely. I think people just have to keep plugging away at it. And from what I see and being involved in the industry in Australia, there's a whole load of young artists and labels who are coming up with much more confidence than, say, my generation came up with. It was like always a bit too hard, you know? And now young people in their 20s coming to Berlin and being inspired, but then going back and trying to reproduce what they like about what, you know, and feeling the possibility, you know?
So
I think there is...
It's a very healthy
and if that
cross-cultural
keeps happening,
exchange.
then eventually, you know, it will get to that point, I think. Maybe not like in Berlin, but nowhere
No,
will
there's
be quite
nowhere like Berlin.
Berlin.
But we can learn stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I agree. No, it's nice to see. I think, I don't know if this is because I got older and you start caring about some things more than others, but there was a clear point back home, in Melbourne anyway, I can't speak for other cities, but we could see people behaving in the same way that people behave here. They weren't supported by a framework that was the same, but they started believing that they could be an international success from Melbourne. It's funny because half of those people now live in Berlin, but they did come out of the gates really strong with a product, you know, with an artistic product, and belief in themselves, or just not caring about whether or not anyone else believed in them. Yeah. Probably more importantly, just, you know, this, just a bit of attitude. So I think it's changing.
Gigs pay the bills. We don't really, people have a misconception sometimes that when you make a record as a producer, you sell lots of records and you get a few gigs and everything's paid for the year. Then there's a bunch of people that don't make records but are extremely skilled DJs and live performers. But the gigs pay the bills. No one really earns money. I'm going to be frank there. No one really earns money from running a record label. Some people earn money promoting parties, but usually their record label is very successful, or they have a very successful artist on their roster or on their label, and they run a party and lots of people go. Emma, and I might invite someone else up shortly too. Running parties, it's a thing. It's like running a night. I mean, sometimes you get given a budget, sometimes you have to fork out your own money. Is that as well as running a label or doing a podcast? I mean, think about how many mixes that people have to put up for free. You get invited by Groove Magazine, or you get invited by Mixmag or Accelerator. You spend so long making these mixes. How much work, like on a percentage just off the top of your head, how much work is for free in our industry?
Well, I mean, what's the saying? If you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. So I'm doing heaps of stuff I love for free all the time. Like, I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's that constant question of how much something is worth to you financially and how much you need the money as to how much you want to do it. But the good thing about Berlin, and as we've discussed, one of the reasons why a lot of us moved here is that it's quite affordable and we have more time to do the things that we're passionate about. And if I had set out to make big bucks running my parties and my label, I've done a very bad job at that. But I get to do what I love, and I invite my friends to play, and I get inspired by the music, and I feel like also by doing the parties and promoting events, I can give something back. And that's also something with the label, like you can get young artists that might not have an opportunity to release or might not have an opportunity to play, or that nobody's heard before that you know is amazing, and you can give them that opportunity and get people to hear them and promote your country or promote other countries, or like, it's just this, it feeds itself and it's exciting, and that gives you the life energy to do the 700 mixes for free.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, because even though we live we operate in an industry full of it's full of individuals. I mean, when you get a bunch of creative individuals together, you have a lot of larger-than-life personalities sometimes. Yet everyone is forced to engage in some way communally. In Berlin as well, I think there's an opportunity to run parties like we wouldn't run in Australia. And I can see two people up the front that ran something really cool on the weekend. And I don't know if you would like to come up quickly, Claire. So everyone, this is Claire Morgan. Originally Brisbane girl, lived in Sydney a long time, Melbourne 1 year, lived in Berlin 5 years, I think, this year. Claire has been, a friend, a colleague. We met one another through, I'm going to really embarrass you now before you're going to talk. We met one another on an internet forum, a music internet forum, because of a particular record, and we figured out, we had the same tastes and things like that. And Claire was the reason that I played in Sydney the first time, and I can actually see the wonderful person that booked me for that gig. And Renee Trinity is also part of the program. It's a community. We live in a community. We have to get along in a certain point. What do you think of the community in Berlin, and what kind of freedoms do we have here compared to back home to run a party on the edge of the river with a big sound system and book DJs that just have to come across from London, for example?
Well, look, it is actually quite expensive to get someone over from London sometimes, but things that we didn't have to worry about were fees. Paying people fees for things, and
visas,
having some
red tape.
Like someone checking how many security you have, and like police coming, and you don't have that regulation. Like, we really had freedom to go, oh, this is how much we're probably going to make from tickets. That's what we can spend on our party for a great experience for our crowd, and it's simple. It's simplified here.
So it's.
I think in Australia it's becoming more and more of an organisational headache to get through all the official red tape,
and I would argue, therefore,
and it's really like defeating a lot of people in Australia.
And I would argue, therefore, that that's why it could be more of it's more in the direction of an economic commodity, electronic music, as opposed to a cultural commodity that doesn't need to always have a dollar sign on it. That people are, you have to do certain things, but you have a certain amount of freedom to run a party, to do something, to explore this thing. Next question. You're playing next month at Berghain again, and we've talked about Berghain. Another interesting fact that most people probably know here is that Berghain has a tax exemption in Germany, because what it portrays is part of high culture. In Australia, I don't know if there are any tax exemptions for high culture. I don't know if the symphony orchestra or the opera, exactly. But
they actually, orchestras and bodies like that actually had a lot of funding pulled from them rather than tax
which is a very interesting
so quite
thing.
The opposite has happened.
Yeah, and we are our culture, and it's what we place on that culture, and whether it sort of heads in one direction or heads into another direction, and it perhaps loses value if it's not considered a cultural commodity.
Yeah.
And I read another thing recently. Zurich in Switzerland has now said that techno culture, because of its street parade, is an intangible part of its culture. It's like a heritage listed kind of scenario that techno culture is part of their thing. Because people have a good time, people get together, young people enjoy it. It should not be stigmatised.
And also old people. We, at one point on Saturday at our open air party, and the music at the time was DJ Rum, an artist from the UK who was a turntablist playing old jungle records and scratching, like it was complicated. And there was a lady who I estimate to have been about 90, sitting on a stool, the edge of the dance floor with her very old dog sitting next to her, and she had a huge smile on her face, and there was babies there and dogs there and ravers and non-ravers. Like, it was such a mix of people, and that was amazing.
And I think that's the beauty of this city. And tonight is about showing that we have basically a 20 plus year connection in terms of electronic music we all have our own personal foundations, friends and colleagues. And Australian artists, like Margalit said before, are playing every weekend in Berlin. Every single weekend you can go to a really famous club and see and hear an Australian artist. I really want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank people coming from Sydney and Melbourne and just to come for this event. People coming from, just down the road in Kreuzberg. But yeah, I mean, there's a thing about this city. It's important. There's a reason why we all love playing here, that some of us live here, and I think it's a good thing to put it on official record that we are not just the DJ at the bar or the club. We are people that have multiple skills, run businesses, and have been doing so for quite a long time. And we do those things in a foreign country, 16,000 kilometers from home. The great thing is about Berlin in the modern day, I would say that many people can get by not speaking that much German. If you want to learn German, this is the wrong city to live in. Aber vielen Dank. I think some of you speaking German, but we're going to keep it English tonight. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Claire. Thanks, Ed, for all the social media help this week. Thanks, Renee and Dave. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Simon. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Georgina and team. Thank you, Valerio. Thank you, Andreas. I can see Ray at the back, and I really have to do this on record. Well, actually, thanks, Ellie, for coming. Thank you, Rach, my wife over there, for dealing with me the last couple of weeks, trying to get this all off the ground. And it's great that you all came this evening. I hope you stick around tonight and to see you on Sunday. Thank you.